All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Of course, still living in the afterglow of an impressive Sunday afternoon victory for Dallas against Washington. A lot of news to get to today, a lot of very spicy, very interesting stuff. But as always, let's get things started with a little stat of the day, like we like to on this channel, a little palate cleanser. And this is courtesy of the Dallas Cowboys Public Relations Office. You talk about an interesting account to follow on Twitter/X. But they had a very interesting post here. Jake Ferguson is the first tight end in NFL history with at least 50 receptions and 6 receiving touchdowns in the first 7 games of a season. So there's two things I want to point out here. One, this is one of those funny things about stats where it's sort of like cherry picked all these different data points that throw something together to create a first in history. We see this all the time, right? With, a wide receiver is the first guy in NFL history, born in the month of August, that has 2 little brothers, that has 4 straight games of at least 90 yards receiving, right? You compile all these data points and you can create some historical fact. But that doesn't belie the point that right now Jake Ferguson is playing at an extremely high level. He is integrated successfully into the Schottenheimer offense. There was a lot of question marks last year after a 2023 breakout campaign for Ferguson. Is he a good player? Is he actually a quality tight end? Or was he just riding high off Dak Prescott having an MVP performance in 2023? Was he closer to Blake Jarwin than Jason Witten? Right, it's one of those deals. Now, I'm not saying he's as good as Witten, not even close, but it's very obvious that the Cowboys like him in the offense. He's become a touchdown red zone machine. He's not generating any of those deep seam balls, none of those crazy yards after catch plays that he had in 2023. And despite that, he's being incredibly productive. If he can get a little more yak, a little more yards after catch, and hit more of those seams, it's just another element in the Cowboys offense. So credit to Schottenheimer, credit to Dak Prescott, and credit to Jake Ferguson for having a big bounce back year. A lot of people were a little questioning when it came to Dallas Cowboys giving him that extension earlier this before the season started during training camp preseason time frame. A lot of people thought, yeah, team friendly kind of deal, but he did have a bummer of a 2024. Well, he's having a Pro Bowl 2025. He's off to a great start, on track for well over 100 receptions, double-digit touchdowns. I mean, that's legitimate Pro Bowl, first team, starting Pro Bowl kind of numbers for Ferguson. He's doing a great job. And listen, at this point, the way the offense is clicking, you got to feel good about Ferguson's chances to really living up to his contract. All right, let's get into the news. This first report is courtesy of a great source. It's a first-hand source, a primary source, if you will. Demarvian Overshown posted yesterday morning T-21. That, of course, is an allusion to the 21-day practice window that a player has when they get elevated off of injured reserve. They have 21 days to be added to the active roster before their season is over, right? This is how it works with the injured reserve. In the old days, when you're put on injured reserve, you were done for the season. In the new era, you get to be put on injured reserve. You're out for at least 4 games, and then you get a chance to come off of the injured reserve at the team's discretion, and then you got 21 days to actually get added to the active roster, or your season is done. And the Cowboys this week are starting it. Now, based on reports, they're not starting it actually Monday. They're waiting a few days, which makes sense, right? You want to wait till probably Wednesday at the latest possible date because that's your practice day. You don't want to start it like 2 days early for no reason. So they'll probably officially announce it Wednesday would be my guess. But regardless, it looks like Overshown is returning to the practice field, working off of injured reserve. You talk about help coming along the way. Boy, Overshown getting back into the fold. And here's the beautiful thing. Because of the Cowboys, the way their linebacker core is structured right now, we'll have more on that in a little bit. Even when he's healthy or healthy enough to play and actually get involved in a game, he's not going to have to go out there and play every single snap. They can package him up. They can get him as some blitz packages, some things like that. I don't think they'll put him on any goal line or short yardage. He may not even start right away. He'll just be sort of a guy who gets in there the first game, plays maybe a third of the snaps, and put him in a lot of playmaker situations where he doesn't have to, think too much. He doesn't have to be anything close to like a green dot or anything like that. I think that's the right approach, slowly integrate him back into the defense. Because you look at the way Shamar James is playing as a rookie, far from perfect, but becoming a good player. Leofau does some nice things. Kenneth Murray obviously is very flawed, but, he's kind of growing into a role. We got to report on that in a second. So I look at this from a Dallas Cowboys perspective. I mean, this is essentially like acquiring a guy at the trade deadline. The trade deadline is first week of November. It looks like at this point, that'll be about when Overshown returns. So we're looking at basically getting a Pro Bowl star linebacker at the trade deadline. That's what the Cowboys are going to get here. This is absolutely awesome news. And I know a lot of people are like, listen, he's not going to have a huge impact. Let's not put him in a bad position. He's not the savior of the defense. And I don't think anyone serious actually thinks adding Overshown turns this to an elite defense. But I've seen a lot of people comment this, and I think it's actually a very good point. If all he does is help out to the point that they get one more stop a game, right? They get one more punt, right? They have one drive that they get a field goal stop instead of a touchdown. We're talking, at least 4 to 7 points per game, right? You go from a defense that gives up maybe 31 in some of these games to giving up 24 or 27. You look at the Carolina Panthers game, that's a win, right? You look at the Green Bay Packers game, that's a win. The Eagles game, that means they win, right? That can be all the difference in the world if Overshown can get back up to speed the second half of the season. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And especially the fact that this Dallas defense is lacking playmakers, right? Shamar James is becoming that. Deron Bland, obviously with the pick six, starting to get back into that mold. Ezra Rock, who's that kind of player. James Houston in those pass rush modes can be a playmaker. But really outside of that, right? At safety, you're kind of just holding on for dear life. Same thing with a lot of the other corner positions. You look at Kenneth Murray, again, a lot of holding on for dear life. Leofau is a playmaker, I think, but he's a thrill a minute, right? He'll have a great play than a disaster play. I like Maris Leofau just because he gives you that element of a playmaker, but boy, he is not a guy that, like, on a snap-by-snap basis does a lot of great things. He's a guy that will do 2 bad plays and 1 ridiculously good play, and you just live with it, right? He's a good piece to have, don't get me wrong, but if you're relying on Leofau on a snap-by-snap basis, you've got some issues. And of course, defensively, Osa Odigizua, Kenny Clark, solid, right? But I don't think they're not Aaron Donald inside. Overshown can be that playmaker, that guy who gets that big sack, tackle for loss, forced fumble, interception, 4th down stop. I mean, and that's just against the New York Giants on Thanksgiving last year, right? So he's a heck of a player. I'm excited to see that he's back at the practice field, getting back into the groove. What a story! What a leader! What a great morale boost for this team and for Overshown specifically. Again, this was a guy who was the heart and soul of the Cowboys last year when things were at their darkest, and Prescott was hurt and Parsons was hurt, and even Parsons returned. Cooper Rush was playing poorly. The team was playing poorly. And just everything was just collapsing for a 2024 Cowboys team where there was so much hope going into the year. Overshown was the bright spot. Games against San Francisco, Atlanta, the Giants, both Giants games, the Eagles game at home, right? It was one of those guys who just kind of turned the season around from a morale perspective. It gave something for Cowboys fans, at least me personally, to say, okay, this is a future piece. They've got a star here. This season is a total dud because we get to watch DeMarvion Overshown play football and grow into the player a lot of people thought he could be coming out of Texas, and then he had the injury. And now we get a chance to see how he responds. And listen, we don't know how good he'll be or how long it'll take him to fully recover 100%. But just to see him back on the football field, just to see him with an opportunity to play this game and maybe even play it at a high level and help his defense out, that's a win for us all. I don't think anyone is expecting him to go out there and, be first team All-Pro. I don't think anyone's expecting him to go out there and, have that crazy pick six like he did against the New York Giants, against Drew Lock on Thanksgiving last year. I don't think anyone is expecting that. I think everyone just wants to see Overshown out there with his energy, his attitude, and maybe towards the end of the season starts making 1 or 2 big plays a game to help his defense get 1 more stop a game. I think that's all we all, or really, if we're being honest with ourselves, are hoping for. And I think Overshown has a great chance of delivering. Because guess what? At this point in his career, every time he's had a chance, he's bounced back from injury. Listen, he's been dealt with a lot of injuries so far, but he's had the right attitude, the right mentality, and I expect him, just because he's shown he has the ability to do so, I expect him to bounce back and start making an impact, in T-minus 21 days or so. All right, let's get into more news here. This is courtesy of Joseph Hoyt talking about the linebacker position. As the green dot player, Kenneth Murray is in charge of getting players on the same page. That's why he decided to lead 2 defensive player film meetings this week. This was before the Washington Commanders game. Between that and more man/more blitz, the Cowboys changes worked. This is interesting, and I think this is a little Schottenheimer effect, right, in terms of putting some accountability on the players and giving players more authority. This comes from that Pete Carroll mindset that obviously Schottenheimer coached under Carroll for a long time. A lot of people look at Pete Carroll and he's cheering and jumping around on the sideline and being an energy guy, and obviously that's a big part of what he likes in terms of competition and having that college atmosphere. That's a big part of Pete Carroll. But the other part of Pete Carroll that people don't really focus on is that he forces along on his players to be leaders and accountable to each other. Most NFL teams, in fact, I would say the vast majority, all that leadership relies on the coaches. Everyone sits there and say, listen, the coaches and the quarterback, that's where 99% of the leadership comes from. There are some players and team captains, of course, but for the most part, it's on the coaches and it's on the quarterback to sort of, be the meeting set, the attitude setter, things like that. Generally, that's how it goes. Not with Dallas, interestingly enough, at least when it comes to Kenneth Murray, taking on a more active role. And I think Murray can be this guy for Dallas defensively. Now, I think as a linebacker, I thought he played pretty well, all things considered, at least how he's played so far this season against Washington. I mean, he wasn't elite by any means, but I thought he played well, one of his best games of the year. But I think what he can be is be the elder statesman to Overshown, to Shamar James, to Leofau, to all those guys, right? Kind of like Kendricks could have been or was last year potentially, but this is, again, a very young linebacker core, right? Eberflus supposed to be a linebacker guru. I get it, but he's got his hands full just trying to keep this defense afloat in terms of figuring out and solving problems. As much as they took some steps forward against Washington, this is still far from an elite defense. This is far from an average defense, right? They got a lot of flaws and they got a long way to go. But a guy like Murray right here, he can take over sort of the mentorship development role when it comes to that linebacker room, when it comes to some of these front seven guys as well, as Araku, right, in terms of just learning and communicating and what it's like to be a pro. Because if you think about this Cowboys group, Shamar James has played very little football. Leofau's played very little football, right? You look at as Araku's played very little football. It's a very young, in terms of their key playmakers group. Now listen, Jadeveon Clowney doesn't need it. Oso Odigizua doesn't need it. Kenny Clark doesn't need it, right? Those guys, they know what they're doing in terms of veterans, even guys like James Houston, of course. But a lot of these key young playmakers, right, they're still trying to figure things out. And having a guy like Murray, and you can go to the secondary too, Reddy Stewart, Bridges, right, a lot of these young guys, Shavon Revel, who we'll get to in a second, very interesting update there. The safety position, Clark, Bell, Wanye Thomas, first serious legitimate action this season in terms of not special teams work. I think they need a veteran guy who's played a lot of football who can kind of be a stabilizing influence. And I think that's what Murray is becoming. You don't need to be an elite superstar to be kind of the calming force, the sort of, hey, everybody, let's get on the same page. Murray can be that kind of guy. And if he takes that role, I think that's perfect for him. Because as much as Murray has been flawed in terms of being a quality linebacker this season, every step along the way, going back to his collegiate career, he's always been kind of I want to say one of the smartest guys in the room in terms of defensive mindset. He understands the game. Murray's limitations have been physical. You look at that Carolina Panthers fourth down play, right? He was right there to make the play in terms of that fourth down completion of Renfro. He just wasn't quick enough to get there, right? That's sort of the story of Murray's career, right? Where he understands the concepts, he understands what they're trying to do. He just hasn't been able to execute it effectively a lot of the time. And I think from a film perspective, from a leadership perspective, him taking on this role, I think is a good move for Dallas and a good sign for Kenneth Murray. And I think a great decision by Schottenheimer. Let's put more accountability on the players, right? Let's let them step up when the opportunities are there. And I like to see it. All right, this next post is from Nick Harris over at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Great reporter if you're looking for someone to follow on X. He says Cowboys are activating the 21-day practice window for center Cooper Beebe, foot/ankle, as well on Wednesday. Talking about the as well corresponds to the Overshown news. Wide receiver Jonathan Mingo is also being signed to the active roster. Team will need to drop one from the 53-man roster for his place. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. So Jonathan Mingo will be added. It'll be interesting to see what the Cowboys do at the wide receiver position, because if you look at that group, right, you obviously Turpin, Lamb, Pickens, okay, of course. Then you have Flournoy, and then you have Tolbert. And it's sort of like, okay, then you throw Mingo into the mix. That's 6 guys. My gut feeling is Flournoy or Tolbert, obviously. I think they're shipping Tolbert. I mean, I don't know what they're going to get in return. Maybe a 6th, maybe a 7th, but I just feel like he's a guy that can go to a different team and get more targets and actually get more opportunities, because he just seems lost right now with Dallas. And I think Mingo as a blocker, as a physical guy who can, win 50-50 balls and has a more stature to him, I think he adds that element to this Cowboys offense more than Tolbert does. And listen, Tolbert, he's one of those guys that last year was sort of a good story in terms of, the opportunities arose and he made some plays, but he's never lived up to, I don't want to say the hype, because it wasn't like he was a first-round pick, but he never quite lived up to the potential promise that he showed coming out of small college football, at least smaller college football. I think he played at South Alabama, if memory serves. So I think this is an opportunity, I think, for the Cowboys to ship Tolbert, maybe just get a 7th in return, right? Or something like that. Nothing, or a pick swap or something. It doesn't have to mean anything crazy, but I think I think Tolbert is probably the odd man out. Potentially, maybe it's Flournoy going back down to the practice squad. We'll have to see. Obviously, Jalen Cropper's a guy who's probably, I think he was waived and then added back to the practice squad, so I don't even think he's an option there. It'll be very interesting to see what the Cowboys do at wide receiver, or if they move somebody else, off the active roster. Something to keep an eye on for sure. But Cooper Beebe getting back into the practice window, boy, is that big, because obviously Hoffman's a feisty guy and he's a competent backup, but he's had a rough couple games. Listen, he's a backup. backup, right? If he was a star, he'd be a starter, right? It's one of those things. I think he's a feisty guy. He's an effort guy. He's a great culture guy. But for a long-term basis, Hoffman is not someone you want to play a center position for multiple games, because it's one thing to play one game or to sub in for, in the middle of a game. But at this point, Hoffman's become a vocal point for opposing defenses to attack, to scheme up ways to create some havoc by isolating Hoffman. He's kind of limiting some things they want to do in the run game as well. Don't get me wrong. I think he's feisty. I think he does some good things. But overall, I think in the long term, the more he plays, the more the opposition says, okay, this is the guy to attack. Not Booker, not Tyler Smith. Like, we'll whole hog put a lot of pressure on Hoffman, and we'll create some issues in this offensive line. I think getting BB back again, it seems right now, within the next 3 weeks, great sign there, will be huge for this Cowboys offense. Because again, BB, really quality center. One of the more underrated players, I think, in the NFC East and the NFC in general. I think he doesn't get the praise, the adoration as a lot of offensive linemen. And I don't think he's like a superstar, but he's just a good, solid, hardworking, smart, high-effort football player. Exactly what you want at the center position. All right, let's get into some more news here. This is courtesy of a report from John Machota. Cowboys coach Brian Schottenheimer on Dallas's defense playing more man coverage versus Washington. At the end of the day, this was a team we wanted to play man-to-man against. There was numbers and analytics that said that was the right way to play these guys, and each week is different. But I thought we played man-to-man very well. But we got to improve our zone coverages as well. That's true. Just proud of the guys. The defense, they've taken a lot of bullets, and deservedly so in some regards. I love that line, right? I love that. Because what do coaches most of the time say, after a pretty solid performance for a beleaguered unit, in this case, the Cowboys defense? They took in some bullets, but they responded. They got off the mat, which is true. But I love that point, and deservedly so, right? I love that from Schottenheimer. He's so honest and authentic. You gotta love that. It's great to see. They played really hard. They tackled well. Those are two really good points. As much as you can say about the Dallas Cowboys, and obviously did some good things defensively. Not obviously the most dominant game in NFL history, but a lot of big plays, a lot of key stops, a lot of punts, a lot of sacks. They tackled well throughout the game, which is a key part, of course, anytime you're trying to play good defense. Schottenheimer goes on to say they're aware of what's being said about them, and they don't like it. There's pride in that room. There's great players in that room. There's great coaches in that room. Like I said, middle of the week, this is not going to be the worst adversity that we'll go through this season. So what do? You get back to work, you make changes, you make adjustments. To go out and put a performance like this together is really good for confidence, but at the same time, I thought the communication was outstanding. Matt Eberflus and that defensive staff put together a hell of a plan. I thought Matt called a hell of a game. The players went out there and executed. Yeah, I agree with everything Schottenheimer said there, certainly at the end. I thought it was a good plan. I mean, remember, the Cowboys were really beat up in the secondary. Everyone wants to talk about it, and I see in the comments section, well, Washington was down 3 receivers. That's very true. But Dallas was down their best corner, at least on paper, in Diggs. Their starting safety, Malik Hooker, their backup to their starting safety, Wanye Thomas. So they were starting essentially a third-string safety, and an undrafted free agent, Elijah Clark, was playing a lot of football as well. They're down, at the time, DeMarvin Overshown, their best defensive player, right? So I'm not going to sit here and say the Cowboys were, 100% healthy. And I'm not saying Washington was 100% healthy. But both guys had injuries. Both, if you look at the offense for the Commanders, 3 key starters were out. Okay, Dallas had 3 key starters, Diggs, Hooker, and Overshown. Okay, it evens out. This is the NFL. Injuries, they're not an excuse. Did anyone give the Cowboys an excuse because they lost the Carolina Panthers without CeeDee Lamb, without Cooper Beebe, without Devontae Turpin? Of course not, right? It's just the NFL. It's just how it works. Now, I will say the one caveat is if you have a star quarterback like Lamar Jackson, like Prescott, like Josh Allen, and you have to play an incompetent backup, you get a little bit of an excuse, right? Because it's like, listen, your team is built around one player, and now you got to play a completely different backup quarterback. At least for a few weeks, you get an excuse as the team tries to reorient itself to the new quarterback if it's a long-term injury. So that's the one exception if you've got sort of incompetent guy. But even Washington, Jane Daniels got hurt. And listen, Mariota is a competent guy. He won games last year. He beat Dallas last year. He played a lot of good football this year when Jane Daniels was out. He's been a starter in the NFL. He's won a playoff game. He's one of the better backups in the National Football League. So I look at the all the injuries and the sort of caveats you want to throw in there, and I get it. But the reality reality is it was a good plan and it was well executed, and the Cowboys made the big plays to win the game and win it decisively, especially on defense, right? They were on the field a lot of possessions, right? Normally how the Cowboys have played at least the first half of this, season, I would say the first 4 or 5 games was very methodical, deliberate, controlled the clock. Last few games it's been a lot of big plays. I think a lot of this is how opposing defenses are playing the Cowboys offense. They're being a little bit more aggressive because I think they say, listen, if we play a zone coverage ourselves or play very soft or some shell look, they'll just go right down the field, they'll run the football and dink and dunk us. Maybe if we're hyper aggressive, jump some things, try and get after the quarterback, maybe we'll stop them. And then the result is they've given up a lot of big plays. That's sort of the feeling I've gotten. I don't know if that's actually 100% true by design, but that's at least the vibe I get watching the games and watching the film, as what opposing defenses, specifically the Jets, Panthers, now Washington, have tried to do and failed to do in some regards, but at least that's been the attempt, and that's forced the Cowboys defense on the field more because the Cowboys have scored more quickly. And the result is they've been in some challenging situations, and the Washington game was no different, but they stepped up, made the big plays, and got the win. It wasn't perfect. I did a Shamar James film review actually yesterday. Check it out if you haven't seen it. A lot of things to improve on from James' perspective, but a lot of big plays as well, a lot of things to like. The future is certainly very bright for this Cowboys defense, and give credit to Schottenheimer. He said, we're going to make some changes, we're going to make some adjustments, and he did. They stuck with Shamar James even though Sanborn got healthy, right? They switched up the scheme dramatically. They called a great game, mix in some blitzes, mix in some man. One of the things I love about Eberflus's game plan the most, since I watched a lot of the film, looking at what they did specifically with Shamar James, is while they blitzed a lot and did a lot of things, they actually played a lot of straight up zone, the stuff that Eberflus likes to do. They mixed it up. Right, people looked at the game and said, well, Jane Daniels maybe missed a few throws or something like that, and that's true. But that can happen when you mix things up, because if you just run man and blitz all the time, quarterbacks know that. They get used to that. They say, okay, here's how I can throw, here's the timing of the route, all that kind of stuff. But if you constantly mix it up, quarterbacks don't know. If you blitz one play and the quarterback has to get rid of it quickly, and then the next play you drop into standard zone, the quarterback's rhythm is off, right? It's like, okay, I got to get rid of it, because on the last 2 plays, I was pressured and had to scramble because of the blitz. Now it's just zone. You're like, oh crap, and you're in a rush, you throw it, you miss it, incomplete pass. We saw that with Jane Daniels, we saw that with Marcus Mariota, right? He was under pressure all the time when he got in the game, so when it came time when he had some time to throw it down the field, his rhythm and timing was off. That's why you mix things up. That's why you do a good combination of zone and man, and that's exactly what Eberflus did. Called a really good game. Schottenheimer calls it out here. I mean, this is exactly what we want from leadership from Schottenheimer. I mean, you're talking about a head coach in terms of taking leadership of the entire team. This is the best job we've seen since probably Bill Parcells. Now, not a high bar to meet, right? Wade Phillips, of course, basically handed over the offense completely during his tenure as the Cowboys head coach, and Jason Garrett was, he was an interesting guy. And Mike McCarthy, I think he was active in some roles, but I think he was a little bit more passive when it came to the defense. He was more of a high-level CEO and an offensive guy, of course. Schottenheimer, he's taken a more active, hands-on role, which I appreciate, right? Certainly a change. And listen, he's sticking with Eberflus, at least publicly. I think there are some very concerns, right? If the big boss has to go in and meet with you, like Eberflus, if Schottenheimer being the big boss, Eberflus being the middle manager, if the big boss has to get involved, that's usually not a good sign. But so far, after one game, so good. The trend is at least in a positive direction for once. We'll have to see what they do going forward, of course, but you got to like what Shawnee is doing with how he's leading this team, right? It's a good sign of his leadership as a head coach for the Cowboys. All right, this next report here is courtesy of Nick Harris, once again, talking about rookies or injured guys and rookies returning. This time, it's Cowboys rookie cornerback Siobhan Revel. Will also have his 21-day practice window opened on Wednesday. Briefly caught up with him in the locker room, and he's about as happy as he's been since arriving in Dallas. Said he completely trusts his knee and is ready to get out there. Okay, so this is awesome. And Revel's one of these guys, again, he's not a savior. He's not a guy that's going to come in and play at an elite level. But boy, with the rumors of Trayvon Diggs potentially being traded, Revel having 2 good weeks of practice, because I'm checking the date here. So the trade deadline's the first week of November. If he gets activated Wednesday practice, right, that would be the 22nd of October. If he goes through this week of practice, he won't play Sunday. But if he goes through this week of practice and the next week of practice, and he's looking pretty good, like maybe he can play, Diggs may be a guy who gets moved. Because then you start having Kalen Carson, you start having Siobhan Revel, Bridges played some, obviously Kyer Elam has his flaws, but he's played. Deron Bland obviously being a good player for the secondary and in terms of the cornerback room. Reddy Stewart holding down nickel, pretty solid job there. You add Revel into the mix, if he's got that first round ability, I tell you what, Diggs being shipped just seems to be more and more likely by the day. And that's not really an indictment of Trayvon Diggs in this case. That would be if Revel steps up in practice. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Again, I don't think he plays this Sunday. I don't think he plays the following Sunday. But if he looks good in practice and the Cowboys like what they see, that's an indication that Trayvon Diggs could be traded sooner rather than later. And I don't think there's a high probability. I would put it at maybe 10% Diggs gets traded. But this news, I think, makes that odds maybe a little bit higher, right? If Revel starts doing good things in practice, every good practice Revel has, those odds from Diggs go up another 10%. And it will get to the point where it'll be a likely option for Diggs to get traded if someone wants to take him on. That's obviously the big question there. But again, great news. I mean, one of the things I talked about before the season, and I said this, September I said was going to be rough with all these injuries on defense, right? All these key players banged up. And then you threw the injuries on offense, right? And you're like, okay, boys, September got more rough than I thought, but they got through it. They found a way to get through it. Offensive line getting healthier, receiving room getting healthier. Now defense, we're seeing some of these guys, the Overshowns, the Revels, starting to come back and get integrated. I think this is a good sign, obviously. Something to keep an eye on. Doesn't really have bearing on this week or the next, in my opinion, but for the rest of the season and for the future, this is big for the Cowboys. All right, this next report is courtesy of John Machota. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones had a lot of praise for Brian Schottenheimer after Sunday's 44-22 win over Washington. To some degree, we didn't have no way to go but up on defense, but I didn't expect this kind of performance from our defense, so kudos to DC Matt Eberflus and certainly Brian Schottenheimer. He had a lot of fingerprints on this Sunday. He's the head coach. Obviously, he calls the offensive plays, and there he is spending a lot of last week working with the defensive coordinator. That's a coach. That is a coach right there. This was a big day for Brian. A lot of people would say there's not enough minutes to go around to cover all that ground. He's so engaged, and he's so appreciative of his chance to be doing this that I believe he would spend 36 hours a day if he needed to do a little work back in the equipment room if needed. Give him a lot of credit here. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Jerry Jones here. I mean, we talked about it, a couple times this season. Schottenheimer has forced changes on this defense. He's taken a hands-on role. Again, he's the culture setter and he's the offensive play caller. And I tell you what, for most coaches, that's it. Right, you stop right there. But he's active on defense. He's very active. We've seen him force changes. We've seen him take a leadership role. He's sitting in on meetings. You talk about a guy that has clarity of purpose. When the Cowboys hired Brian Schottenheimer back, obviously, when they did their coaching search, the very minimal search, a lot of people were very critical of it. One of the positive things I think potentially at the time I said, you're getting a guy here in Schottenheimer who has true clarity of purpose. He doesn't need, let me rephrase that. He doesn't want the job. He needs the job. For him, it's a dream job. For him, it's the opportunity of a lifetime. Mike McCarthy didn't need a coach for the Dallas Cowboys. He wanted to. Wade Phillips didn't need to. He wanted to. Jason Garrett got handed the job, right? Jerry Jones loved him since 2006, 2007. Obviously, before that, when he was the backup with Dallas, he was going to be the head coach at some point, barring something crazy anyway. Right, this is a guy here. Even Jimmy Johnson didn't need to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Barry Switzer didn't need to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. You look at a guy like Kieran Schottenheimer, he needed this opportunity. This was what he'd been waiting for his entire career. He'd been scratching and clawing his entire career. And the fact that he's not going to let it slip through his fingers, he's not going to just let it go. He's got clarity of purpose. He wants to win. He wants to take advantage of this opportunity. Will he? We'll have to see. Will the Cowboys be successful in the long term? Again, we'll have to see. Obviously, what he's done offensively is absolutely outstanding. The changes he's forced on defense, credit where credit is due, and he's doing some good things in the culture. So he's been in my opinion, I give him a B+ at this point, right? He's not perfect, some things to clean up as always. But I have more optimism about Schottenheimer and his coaching leadership since any coach since Bill Parcells. I think that's pretty clear. I think most people would agree with that. Long way to go, though, of course. But I think what he did in terms of what Jerry Jones recognized here in the comments from Jones and Schottenheimer's leadership, it's all positive when it comes to the head coach and the Dallas Cowboys. Even the issues with Dallas this year, it's more talent, it's more defensive play calling, right? And I know Schottenheimer, he hired Eberflus, so some of the defensive issues fall on him, which is why it's great he's taking an active role. But even that, I mean, it's not like the offense, even with all their injuries, has been like a disaster. The play calling's been good, the game planning's been good, the execution's been good, the culture, the vibes have all been good. How about bouncing back from adversity, right? This is one thing I want to point out here real quick, is that going into week one, right, trading Micah Parsons, Cowboys weren't expected to be that good anyway. A lot of people down on Schottenheimer. What did everyone say? Cowboys are going to get killed. Super Bowl champs at Philly, they're going to get killed. Close game. You can make an argument they should have won. They out-physicaled Philly, right, for sure. Okay, facing some adversity, they bounce back. How about they get waxed by Chicago in a game where everybody gets hurt and they have a bunch of takeaways go against them? They give up big plays. How do they bounce back? They have Packers coming to town. And Micah Parsons, devastated by injuries. Packers looking like juggernauts, coming off a disappointing loss. Everyone's like, oh, Packers are going to annihilate Dallas. Down 2 scores early. Cowboys battle back, force the tie, and we're this close to upsetting Green Bay. Bouncing back from adversity. How about the Carolina loss last week? And we saw the bounce back Sunday. This is a team that has that great culture already. It seems Schottenheimer, great tactician, great play caller, doing above and beyond work, trying to work with the defense, help any way he can. Listen, as a coach, I was 50-50 on the hire. A lot of people were down. I said, let's give it time. There's some good things here. He has exceeded expectations every step of the way. And I think he's even exceeded Jerry Jones's expectations based on how he's coached this football team. All right, and one final report to end on here from John Machota. Cowboys coach Brian Schottenheimer said Trayvon Diggs was at the facility today, but is still in concussion protocol. Nothing abnormal there, right? That's all kind of standard stuff. It's just something to keep an eye on with Diggs, right, in terms of what they do with him. If it looks like they're kind of just shelving him in terms of the concussion protocol and it's taking a long time, to me, that would be something. Now, if he plays next week and starts, and I think then we can put the concussion thing to bed. But it is something to keep an eye on, is something to track here. It's a very interesting situation with Trayvon Diggs, especially considering the timing with Revel, again, getting added to the off of the injured reserve in terms of starting his 21-day practice window. Definitely something to keep an eye on, of course. All right, let's get into the comments here. We're going to get started, as we always like to, with member comments. Greatly appreciate the members. If you want to make sure your comment is always heard, become a member, because my promise to members is I will address every single member comment every single day. Non-member comments, I will get to you time permitting. But without further ado, let's get into the comments. This is from Texas Twister 22. He wrote, well, you've officially made it. I saw your SMI post on Reddit about how the Cowboys were playing 4 rookies. Keep up the amazing work, Nick. Well, if you would share the link to that, I'd be curious just to check it out and see if someone properly cited their source there. But yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Thanks for sharing that. Bubba Baker 6244 comments, my thought on Diggs is Jerry is using him as a chip to get the player he wants with bait and less with draft picks. He just wishes people would be quiet about Diggs. You know, that's an interesting point, right? Jerry Jones has been, and Schottenheimer too, has been very praiseworthy of Diggs. And just kind of, sort of a nothing burger outside of maybe that Edward report. So, I think it's one of those things where it could be, hey, hype up a player. He's great. He's amazing. He just slipped and fell in the bathtub, banged his head a little bit. We're being precautionary. There is sort of an element there potentially too, where they're trying to make sure the house isn't falling apart. So we want it to sell kind of vibe there from Jerry Jones. I think you got a great point there. Bubba went on to also state Staubach and Dak have some similarities. They're both great leaders and hyper accurate. Dallas had stacked teams those years, and you could count on you could count on the same great team mostly year after year. I don't know. Dak might have beaten Rodgers' record put in that situation. Something to think about. I met him in '75 and talked to Roger for quite a while. Nicest person you would ever want to meet. Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't understand, and there's a lot of non-Cowboys fans that don't understand the myth of Roger Staubach, and I tell people, imagine if Tim Tebow, right? Tim Tebow was just a cultural phenomenon. Heisman Trophy winner at Florida, devout Christian, all that stuff, clean cut, classic American golden boy thing. Imagine if Tim Tebow had gone to Florida, did what he did at Florida, then went to Iraq for 5 years, okay? Then came back and coached America's team to 2 Super Bowl championships, 5 Super Bowl appearances. Obviously, the 1970 game he didn't play in, but he was part of that team. So, okay, we'll call it 4, right? And led a lot of amazing comebacks the entire way, right? Was the face of the National Football League. That was Roger Staubach. He was a sensation, Naval Academy, right? We're talking about the post-World War II era, Cold War era, right? This was a big deal. He goes to the Naval Academy, climbs his way up the depth chart, wins the Heisman Trophy, goes to Vietnam, goes for the Dallas Cowboys, wins multiple titles, Captain Comeback, Captain America. Like, we will never see another Roger Staubach. It is absolutely insane. I tell people all the time, the closest thing we've ever seen to Staubach in terms of media attention is Tim Tebow. And if Tim Tebow was terrible in the NFL, if Tebow had been great and had won multiple championships and served in Iraq, that is Roger Staubach. I think people don't understand how special Staubach is and was in terms of as a player and as he is today. up to this point. One of the greatest Americans, in my opinion, in the 21st century. Like, his story is unparalleled with what he has done in his life, especially post-football, the quality of person he seems to be, the business he built. I mean, Roger Staubach is when you talk about great Americans, we're talking about, I think that and next year we're getting the 250th anniversary, right, of America. In my opinion, Staubach is a guy that needs to be added among the all-time great Americans because his story is just ridiculous. Listen, Prescott's a great leader. He's doing a lot of great things. He's a great family man, a lot of great things in the community. I mean, A++ from Prescott. But Staubach, absolutely legendary, mythical figure, just in not just in Cowboys history, NFL history, but American history. All right, David Dobbins, 5887, writes, go as long or as short as you like. It's always solid through and through. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think my big theme is just to keep this as long as the news permits and to address all the comments that I can. Speaking for myself regarding the Werder/1053 reporting, I tend to go with the one in quotes. Yeah, this is a callback to I had the two reports where Ed Werder had his commentary, 1053 the fan had theirs. It's sort of two different, it's same movie talking about Trayvon Diggs, but two different, vantage points, right? Werder, the way he reported it made it sound like, oh my goodness, was Diggs going to lose his game check? A lot of not liking Diggs, a lot of no comment, a lot of mystery, a lot of drama. Whereas the 1053 the fan report had, Jerry Jones saying, "Oh, we love Diggs. Everything's fine. No problem at all. We, can't wait to have him back. We need him." So it's the two movies, one screen effect. And yeah, I think you have the right mindset, right approach there. David also writes, "Don't make me be that guy." Okay, I'll be that guy. Washington was down their top 3 wide receivers. I don't want to hear diddly about the defense until next Monday. Just saying. I don't think anyone thinks that they're an elite defense. I don't think anyone thinks they're an average defense. It's still a bad defense, right? Just looking for improvement. And listen, like I said before, they were down a bunch of guys. They were down Diggs. They were down Malik Hooker. They were down to their third string safety. They were playing a lot of an undrafted free agent safety, Elijah Clark, right? They played a lot of Bridges, right? A 7th round rookie. Shamar James, a 5th round rookie, right? They're playing a lot of guys that are new to the Cowboys, new to the NFL, new to, just football and big time, big boy football in general. And they stepped up. Reddy Stewart, right? Again, this is his second year in the NFL, but wasn't exactly playing a lot before he showed up for Dallas. So again, what they have in terms of guys that are playing, it's a lot of cast-offs. It's Kyrie Elam. Career's over. Career's dead. He was a starter, right, for Dallas. So I know there's a lot of, Washington was down a few guys. Dallas was down a few guys. Dallas is playing a lot of cast-offs. It's still a defense that's very talent deficient. They still got a lot of issues. But considering the injuries that Dallas had defensively, Overshown didn't play, for example, right? You're talking about your best defensive player. So despite all the injuries Dallas had, paired with the injuries Washington had, it was still a good performance, and it's still the NFL. Injuries happen, injuries matter, right? And I think the fact that Cowboys were able to put together a solid outing and make some big plays and come up with some big stops is still commendable regardless of how many issues, how many injuries the opposition had, because guess what? Everyone has injuries. Everybody's beat up. All right, this next comment here is from Plague Doctor. I've been a proponent of more man and blitzes. I understood why Flus put in the system he did. If I had Parsons, I probably would have done something similar. You don't need to blitz a lot when you have him as a game wrecker. On a young team that has not had a consistent coordinator or system, you have to be more basic. Man and blitzing are the basics. Multi-zone schemes are for more advanced defenses that have played together and had consistent communication. Bland and Diggs have rarely been on the field together. Now Hooker is out and Wilson is a liability in coverage. Really, he's a liability in all phases of the game, but especially in coverage. It's disappointing because he was such a good player 3 to 4 years ago. You bring up a great point there before I get to the rest of your comment that, playing man and blitzing is very similar. It's one of the reasons why Dan Quinn is a great turnaround artist because he makes it simple. Right, he cleans up all the confusion. He says, listen, we're just going to play man and play aggressive, get after the quarterback, attack downhill, right? Give us some big plays. It's fine. We'll figure it out. We're just going to be hyper-aggressive, attack downhill. Keep it simple, right? That's why Quinn is so good at taking terrible teams and making them competitive, right? He does a great job of that. Did it with Dallas, is doing it with Washington. That's why he's one of the best in the business at it. Overall, I think on the defense, over-analysis paralysis is real, and sometimes you just have to keep it simple. I appreciate Flus just trying to put in a sustainable system, but until we're ready, it will be wasted on a lot of players who might not even be here next year, like Wilson. We do have to remember Washington was missing their best receivers, but they are still the same rushing attack we've seen carve up defenses, and they made enough passes to keep us honest. I just temper expectations as fans. I still say we have a Super Bowl caliber offense. I don't even know if we'll hit the playoffs this year, but I think we need to do whatever we need to in order to keep Pickens. Every top offense has those two number one options. Yeah, I agree with everything you said there, right? I don't think this is a suddenly the Cowboys are not championship contenders. I don't think so, right? I mean, you can have, obviously, as a fan, you can be excited for a big win, and we're just looking for, I think, the right thing. The right approach is improvement on defense and finding some guys to build around, and that's Ezraku, that's James, that's Bland, that's Odigizua, that's Kenny Clark, right? You look at maybe a Reddy Stewart coming into a role for this team. Maybe some of these young safeties can carve out a role going forward, at least be depth pieces, right? Leofau being a playmaker in some role for this Cowboys defense and special teams, right? Trying to figure out who your guys are going to be. And you do bring up a great point about, the zone coverage is more advanced, guys playing together for a long time. That is a very good point. And I do agree with you about Pickens, and I think they will, right? I think they understand, and Jerry Jones understands it, and Schottenheimer understands it. Schottenheimer was hired. I think a big part of that was working to unleash Prescott and the relationship with Prescott. And I think right now they see how well Prescott's playing with Schottenheimer's scheme and strategy, and Lamb and Pickens, especially how well Pickens played in the absence of Lamb. They're going to at least tag him. I think that's all but a done deal, and I think they're going to work their best to extend him as they should. Dino Leche 9397 comments, Nick, this is why you are very liked as a Cowboy content creator. Admitting you were wrong about us wanting more blitz packages and man underneath. You are humble, which makes you a strong person. Keep up your great work, delivering fantastic value on Cowboys content. Thank you for being authentic. Well, I appreciate the kind words, but I was horrifically wrong. So it's not like I can hide behind that, right? It's one of those things when you're wrong, right? You could, I feel like if you're incorrect and you've proven yourself to make, be just wrong, like trying to like obfuscate after the fact and like try and like hedge your bets a little bit. It's like, well, I was actually right, when they're trying to find all these nitnoids. Like, listen, man, if you're wrong, you're wrong. It just happens, right? I mean, as my wife reminds me, I'm wrong a whole lot more than I think I am sometimes. So listen, I think when you're wrong, you got to be honest. You got to be real, and that's the only way you can get better. Whether as a talking on camera or being a fan or whatever in life, being a parent, a father, a husband, coworker, employee, business owner, whatever it may be, right? When you're in the wrong, you got to kind of admit it, own up to it, recognize your thought process that you screwed up, and just try and move forward, right? I think that's the goal for all of us. And in this case, I was 100% wrong, so there was no point trying to hide behind it, but I greatly appreciate the nice words. Thank you. All right, this next comment is from Bill Bell 1344. He writes, Nick, what college did you play for? Good to see Bland get a pick six. So I played for a school, it's called the Citadel. It's in Charleston, South Carolina. Before you look up my highlights, there are none. I was a backup my entire career there. It's one of the reasons why when I look at, like busts like Mozzie Smith, I kind of have a little bit of a personal connection to it because, listen, I wasn't like a top flight recruit or anything like that, but I had some, big aspirations. I was going to hopefully do some good things in college, and it just didn't work out. So I understand when people are like, oh, this guy's a bust. He just didn't work out. I'm like, yeah, well, I know what that's like. I was one of those guys, but that's where I played small time Division I AA FCS football. William Mortensen, 1889, writes, Bland was a tackling machine yesterday. For sure, boy, did he have a game. Maybe one of the best games of his career in terms of all-around tackling, pick six. Phenomenal job by Deron Bland. Maybe the best game from a corner the Cowboys have seen in this decade, right? I mean, it was an awesome game from Deron Bland. Tone Cyphers 9239 writes, on a different note, we can see the difference between Shoddy and Dan Quinn and how they handle injuries and adversity differently. We were still functional and similar offensively with CeeDee Lamb with 4 offensive linemen out against the Jets. And Kevontae Turpin too, by the way. Dan Quinn's team is built upon their top talent and looks different without key players in the game. Got to give Shoddy credit for getting the team ready to play each week. This is a phenomenal point because this was also a criticism of Mike McCarthy, and obviously Quinn was part of McCarthy's staff. And there's a lot of teams like that, right? Where, listen, if everyone's healthy and everyone's rocking and rolling, they look great. The Baltimore Ravens are kind of like that. But they've started to have some injuries, and the Ravens have really struggled. They're 1-5. They got one win. Ravens, a team with Super Bowl aspirations, a legitimate. If you picked the Ravens to win the Super Bowl this year, people would be like, okay, that seems like a good pick. And they're 1-5. I mean, they're on the verge of a losing season potentially if they don't turn things around quickly. And I think the reality is, a lot of teams when they have those injuries, they fall apart. But good coaches, the McVays, the Shanahans, they find a way to just keep it afloat. And Schottenheimer, to his credit, seems to be, again, small sample size, 7 games, putting himself more into the Shanahan conversation than he is maybe the Quinn conversation. And I think that's a good sign for Dallas, of course. Great comment. Appreciate it. Bruce Plenderleith 838 writes, I remember Roger and Pearson and Tony Hill. This offense is closer to that than Troy, Danny, or Tony Romo. We live by the blitz. We die by the blitz. Apology accepted. That's funny. The comment about Diggs. Diggs is about picks. He takes chances. That's going to make his whatever average higher. This game is on the field, but not in books. You said it better. Over time, the zone defense has been more successful for teams that win Super Bowls. I think the thinking was we need to do that too, and adjusting has been difficult because it isn't our identity. I see Diggs playing a way that he finds uncomfortable, and he wants to step in, but he's afraid of getting beat. Yeah, there is corners so tough, right? You're on an island, right? So it's one of those things, if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't trust yourself, it's just going to look bad. And Trayvon Diggs, for most of his playing time this season, at least in a lot of games, has looked pretty bad. I mean, I think he played well against the Packers. I think he played well in week 1 against Philadelphia. But overall, obviously not an outstanding game for Diggs, or outstanding season, for Diggs. Obviously, the drama doesn't help his cause at all. But listen, he still has the talent. And I'm rooting for Trayvon Diggs, by the way. I want Trayvon Diggs to be successful. A thrill, I think we all had this thrill in 2021, the first, 7-8 games it was, where he was just an interception machine and 2 pick sixes. Like, he was seeing Trayvon Diggs emerge as a star, and he played well in 2022 as well. It was sort of like, boy, the Cowboys got a great one. I mean, this is awesome. Easily the best corner since Terrence Newman, maybe even better. And now suddenly it looks like, it's coming to an end in an ugly way. Look, it happens. It's the National Football League. Injuries, culture issues, scheme changes. But I think we're all rooting for Trayvon Diggs. I'm rooting for Trayvon Diggs. I think he can still turn it around, but it's just not looking great right now. And I still think it's heavily likely he's not going to be in Dallas. Certainly not after next offseason. I think there's a good chance if Revel looks good in practice, he gets traded again if someone wants his contract this season. But all right, that's all the comments we have for you guys today. Really appreciate our comments. Listen, I still say as a fan, right, as players, they say you get the 24-hour rule. I say as a fan, you get 48 hours, right? So obviously keep enjoying this one all the way through today in terms of the Victory Sunday. And then tomorrow morning, it's about shifting gears and getting ready for the rest of the season and obviously the upcoming opponent. We'll have a lot of news, of course. Practice is going to be interesting. Overshown, BB, Revel, a lot of guys back into the fold. Mingo back on the 53. Who do they take off the 53? That'll be something to keep an eye on, of course. And we'll bring you the news starting tomorrow, as we always do. Make sure you check out my Shamar James film review if you haven't already. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.